So today, we will be going through the topic of using time slots with ease. Our focus today is events where you have multiple offerings, whether those are recurring events or perhaps just an event with many different available shifts or jobs. We'll start off, as always, by defining some key terms. Then we'll discuss a couple different examples of time slots. We'll move into some special features and key settings that are specifically related to time slot events and when you're creating or updating those. And then lastly, we have a few tips for managing time slots once they're in place, including we'll briefly kind of touch on setting up reservations and communicating with your attendees. So the first thing to talk about in this subject is what is a time slot event? And to define that, we actually need to back up and define what an opportunity is. In service, the term opportunity is really kind of an umbrella term. Any of the ways that you would have volunteers sign up for or record activity is going to fall into what we call an opportunity. If we click into adding a new opportunity, the first thing we'll see in this menu is opportunity type, and this contains three options. We have normal events, time slot events, and service projects. There is an option to create paid events as well. If you have questions about that, please ask our support. But generally speaking, the event types here are ways for you to create shift-based work. A normal event, as the name kind of implies, you might also call this a special event, is a one-off. There's one start date and time, one end date and time. So you're essentially creating a singular shift. If you have something that occurs pretty infrequently or is just truly a one-off where everyone's signing up for the same thing, maybe you divvy out jobs when people get there, but initially at least everyone signs up for the same thing, that would fall into what we call a normal event. Time slot events are essentially an expansion on that concept. Time slot events allow you to create multiple shifts that volunteers can see and select between. Those shifts could be the idea of like a recurring event. So perhaps you have the same thing happening over the course of the year. It's once a month, so there's 12 instances. You could create 12 different time slots to represent those different dates and times. Or maybe you have something that occurs on a daily basis, right? We'll walk through creating that kind of recurring portion and how to repeat that out. You do not need to manually create those shifts independently. So we'll kind of come back to that concept. But you could also use time slots for something like a festival. Perhaps you have 5 different positions all happening at the same date and time, and you just want volunteers to select what job they'd like to do or what they're interested in doing. Both of those are very valid uses of time slot events, but they both contain kind of the same definition. We have one opportunity, so it has one given name, it has one description, but there are multiple shifts that a volunteer can select between. Whether those shifts are a variation on the time itself, or the day, or the date of the shift, or if they're a variation on the job. That kind of definition comes in how you create the time slots. Let me show you an example of both of those definitions, and then we'll get into some special features and kind of setting these up and how you might do that. So in my system right now, this is our demonstration console. I have a couple time slot events I want to call your attention to. One is called Sort and Repack. This is kind of like a warehouse sorting event where I have the same thing happening on a daily basis, and volunteers just go and pick what day works best for them. All of these shifts are essentially the same thing. They're all 1 to 4 p.m., and volunteers are basically doing the same job. There might be some slight variations when it comes to the actual day of, but generally speaking, they're all signing up for the same thing. This time slot event in my system is set up for all of 2025. My volunteers don't see all of 2025 right now, but I've actually set this up on the back end, so I don't really have to touch it again until it comes around to next year, and I need to repeat this out again for the following year. So this is something where you can kind of set it up for the whole year or set it up for a long time frame and then not really have to touch that again, with, of course, some exceptions, like if you have weather situations or you need to cancel a particular shift, you can always go and modify those things. But generally speaking, I'm just kind of creating a large-scale calendar. Now, on that note, an event like this can be engaged as a list view where volunteers go and pick what shift works best for them. But you can also choose to present to your volunteers more of a calendar view. So you can do this in a couple different ways. And if you have questions about this kind of concept, obviously feel free to reach out. But you could present your events in a calendar view so volunteers can go and pick what day works best for them. And then that will show them what's happening on that day. And then they can sign up from there. So this is kind of another way to present things to your volunteers. Okay, so again, this specific time slot event example is that idea of like a recurring shift. I have the same thing happening on a regular basis, and I want volunteers to just go and pick all the dates that work best for them. One special thing I want to point out about time slot events is when a volunteer is registering for an event. So if we go ahead and click in to sign up for the opportunity as a volunteer, it's going to present sort of like a checklist, and volunteers can pick multiple shifts in here. If a volunteer had run a search, like a particular day of the week, for example, they could actually just select all of those shifts at once as well. But yeah, volunteers can go through and choose multiple shifts in here and sign up for, a number of shifts at one time, if they're looking to do multiple engagements at once. Okay, so that's one example of a time slot event where we have kind of like a long or a large scale shift. Another example, if we scroll down a little bit further, I have an event called Neighborhood and School Cleanup. This is functionally kind of in the realm of a festival. I have several different shifts all happening at one date and time. So you can see all of these are essentially the same time, Monday, May 12th, 8 to noon. There is one position that's slightly longer, this team lead position, but you can see the rest of these are basically the same shift. And so I've used notes on the time slots to distinguish one shift from another. So essentially volunteers are signing up for a position or a job description rather than selecting a particular date and time. So these are two wildly different ways to use time slot events. They're both appropriate, and your event might be something in between. Perhaps you have a cleanup event like this that's every Saturday and there's 3 different jobs and you need volunteers to pick which job they want to do. You can create a time slot event that would represent that type of scale as well. The idea is you have one event with one name and description and generally speaking, one location. So if you have events that occur across multiple locations, you probably want to break those out, although there are always exceptions to that kind of rule. But again, you have one event with different shifts that a volunteer can select between. Okay, so that's really what kind of defines time slot events. Just because we're on the subject, I do want to round this out and describe what service projects are in brief. We have separate videos that run through utilizing service projects in greater detail. We recently did a webinar on that, so there's a recording of that available. But this service projects are essentially long-form activities. You're not defining shifts. Instead, you have a date range during which the project is active, and then generally speaking, volunteers are recording hours into that project as they serve rather than signing up for particular shifts. But let's go ahead and switch back over to time slot events. So when we're creating a time slot event, there's a few different ways that we can do this. If we are creating something like a festival, right? That neighborhood and school cleanup event that I had, that had 5 shifts. I can go ahead and enter in 5 here, click on add slots. Each of those time slots has their own date, start time and end time, number of volunteers needed, number of credit hours, and notes. And so I can just start kind of filling this in. Now, in that example that I shared, a lot of the information was similar. The start and end time and the date were basically all the same. So there are some bulk update options underneath the time slots that you can use to build those out quickly. If we look here, let's say this event is happening on Saturday. I could select that as the date, click on bulk update, and then this will modify all of the time slots that are selected. Right, so by default, they're all selected. I could deselect some of these. Perhaps this first shift is like a prep event the night before. I could go and change that one independently or not have bulk updated it in the first place. But you can use this to bulk update any of these settings. So if they all have the same start time, if they all have the same end time or the same number of volunteers needed, you don't need to go through and do them one by one. I would certainly use these bulk update options for that. Again, this works really well for the example where you have a bunch of shifts occurring on the same date or with the same kind of exact information. My other example of that warehouse sorting event, where it is a lot of shared information, it's 1 to 4 p.m., but every single date is different. Well, that wouldn't necessarily work super well through here. There's a different way to create an event like that. In my example, that event is something like 265 time slots, and I don't necessarily want to go through and write in each date by hand because they are all distinct. That would be pretty tedious. So what you can do for that type of event instead is use a repeat function to take a shift and then repeat it on a schedule. So that specific example that I shared previously, I made that by initially only creating one time slot. I essentially created a template, and then I told the system to repeat that 5 days of the week throughout a date range. So depending on your event, you might need to make multiple templates. Maybe you have a morning shift and an afternoon shift. Well, then you would want to make 2 different time slots initially, one for the morning, one for the afternoon, and then you can repeat those independently. Or maybe you have different offerings on Monday, Wednesday, Friday as compared to Tuesday, Thursday. Again, in that scenario, we'd make 2 different time slots, one for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, one for Tuesday. So you can kind of iterate on this concept, but initially you're just creating your templates, and then we will repeat these later. So that function doesn't appear on this page. You initially only create the templates, and then you go through and fill out the rest of the information on the event. So we'll look at that repeat function in a moment here. I want to point out some of the other features that are unique to time slot events and kind of important as you are building out time slot events. A lot of this information is shared. A lot of this is the same as creating any other opportunity in the system. We also recently did a webinar on creating normal events and how to utilize those. So if you want to learn more about just kind of standard event creation, that's a good resource for that. I want to point out some specific items that relate to time slot events. So as we're going through this, again, most of these things are very similar. I do want to draw your attention to waitlists. These are a pretty common companion with time slot events. The idea of a waitlist in service allows volunteers to sign up for a position that's full so that they're on a waitlist, as the name kind of implies, and then the system will manage that waitlist automatically. So let's say your shift can only take 10 people and there's a lot of interest in this particular date. People could add themselves to the waitlist. If a volunteer cancels who is registered, or if you expand the number of volunteers needed, then the system will automatically pull from the waitlist and add people to the event. So that'll happen on the back end automatically. You don't need to think about that or make any changes there. When someone is added from the waitlist to the event, they do receive a confirmation message right away. And that confirmation message also contains an option for them to cancel. So if they had double booked, they could cancel from there, and then it would just kind of go to the next person on the wait list. So again, this is a pretty common feature to use with time slots, but you don't necessarily need to. It is a setting. If you turn this on, it would apply for every single time slot in the event itself. One very important note about the waitlist is the system will automatically freeze the waitlist the day of the event. So volunteers will not be added automatically from the waitlist, if the event is occurring that calendar day. Okay, the rest of these settings in this kind of first section, again, are pretty standard. There are obviously important things in here, like what interest category this is a part of, whether or not your event is published for volunteers to engage with. These are important subjects, and we do have training material on this as well. Generally speaking, if you're making an event you want volunteers to sign up for, you want to set publish online to yes open. But I want to jump down to the advanced options. There are some settings in here that have specifically to do with time slot events. So if we open up this section and we scroll down a little bit here, there's an option that says allow multiple time slot registrations. This setting, of course, applies to time slot events. There's an option here saying yes, which is the default. This means that a volunteer who is registering for this time slot event can do what I showed earlier. They can select multiple shifts and sign up for a number of shifts at one time, or come back later and sign up for more shifts. For anything that's like a recurring event, like this warehouse sorting example I've mentioned, all of those, you would definitely want the setting on yes, because then volunteers can pick as many shifts as they would like to and sign up for all those different positions. There are two other settings in here, no and require all. No means that a volunteer can only sign up for one shift. They cannot sign up for more than one. So actually my other example of that neighborhood and school cleanup event where all of those were happening at the exact same time, in that example, I would want this set to no, because I don't want volunteers to pick more than one shift. They're all concurrent. Now there is actually a global setting in Service to disallow volunteers or prevent volunteers from signing up for concurrent shifts. That is a global setting. It has nothing to do with particular time slots, although of course it would affect time slots as well. But this would say within this one time slot event, only allow volunteers to pick one shift. This is also helpful if you're creating something like a standard training where you only need volunteers to attend one, or if you have a special event where there's multiple instances, but you want to give more people a chance to sign up for it instead of the same people taking every single shift. You could set that to no, and then volunteers can only pick one shift. Below that, we have a require all option. This means that when a volunteer is registering for this event, they will be registered for every single shift. This is a pretty unique scenario, but let's say you have an event that is more along the lines of a class where volunteers will be attending for multiple sessions, and if they want to sign up for it, they should be signing up for kind of everything. You can make that time slot event require all, and that means that as volunteers sign up, they will automatically have to select everything and register for all the shifts at once. Again, kind of a unique scenario, not something you're going to use all the time, but it is handy when you do need it. The next setting here does also relate specifically to time slot events. There's an option to require approval of volunteer self-registration. Now, this option also exists with normal events. This is a pretty disruptive setting if you're not sure what it does. If we turn it on, so if we set this to yes, it means that volunteers do not directly register for this event. Instead, what it means is volunteers are added to a pending list, and then you have to go through that pending list and approve or reject those applicants. So it's, again, kind of disruptive for the normal workflow, but in the scenario where you want to pick from a pool of applicants or where you want to manually vet or vet every single registration, then this is a very good setting for those kinds of scenarios. There is specifically an option in here that says yes, first time only. This uniquely has to do with time slot events. So if you select this setting, it means that when a volunteer is being approved for this time slot event, they only need to be approved once. So if you've approved them for one shift, then they can go and sign themselves up for any other shift in this time slot event. If you have like a special job where you want to vet volunteers the first time, but then after that, they can sign up for whatever they'd like to. This is one way to accomplish that. Other ways would be using just restrictions on the event. Okay, there's one other very important setting to do with time slot events that I want to point out, and that's this automatically hide open slots until. I kind of showed this example by talking about it. But this setting would allow you to tell the system to withhold time slots until we are a certain number of months prior to those time slots. So, for example, you could choose something like 1 month prior here. I actually have this setting selected for the warehouse sorting event that I showed. So if we go back and look at that example from the volunteer perspective, we are currently in the month of April, obviously. So that is going to display to your volunteers all of the month of April. They can see the remainder of those shifts. Your volunteers will always see what's happening in the current month. But because I have 1 month prior selected for that setting, my volunteers also see all of May, right? So that's what my volunteers are currently seeing in this event. As soon as we hit May 1st, the system will open up all of the June shifts for this particular event. So essentially, it's just kind of rolling out automatically on a monthly basis. It's not a rolling daily calendar, it's a rolling monthly calendar. So on the back end, I mentioned this before, but I have this event set up for all of 2025. I can see further out. I can register people further ahead on this event if I would like to, but my volunteers can only see essentially what I've allowed. So the current month, in my case, plus 1 more month, because I have this set to 1 month prior. So again, that particular setting exists on every time slot event, whether you've already created one or you're making a new one. If we go down to the advanced options for a time slot event specifically, at the very bottom, you have this automatically hide open slots until. The default says show all, so it's going to show everything, but you can choose, hide until 1 month prior, 2 months prior, all the way out to 12 months prior. Okay, so these are kind of some of the unique settings as it relates to creating a time slot event. There's one more very important aspect to creating time slot events, which I've mentioned already, and that's repeating shifts. So if you have a recurring time slot event, let's take this example that I've created here called meal distribution. If we click into this event, I want to go straight into managing the time slots actually, which we can use this shortcut to go into. This takes us to a page where we see all of our time slots that I've created previously. So in my case, I made 2 templates. I have a morning shift and I have an afternoon shift. This event is starting in August and I want to carry this on through the end of the school year. So we're going to go into the end of May next year. So what I can do is take my templates here. So let's say this morning shift, right now this is a Friday. Let's say this is every Monday through Friday. What I can do is on the left-hand side, click on repeat time slot. And then I can tell the system when to repeat this. So I can say this is on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. Then we give it a frequency. So this is a weekly event. I could also say bi-weekly or every other week. Or I could choose to just do the first, second, third, fourth, or last occurrence of the month. Let's do weekly in this scenario. We already have one on August 1st, so I want to start on the 4th. And then we're going through the end of May. So we'll select that as our end date, click on Create Repeating Schedule, and essentially the system will take this shift and then generate a copy of that through the time frame that I have selected. So I had that first morning shift from 9 to noon where I needed 15 volunteers, and it basically just repeated that on Monday through Friday throughout the entirety of that date range. So this is going all the way to the end of May. Now, of course, some of these will have fallen on holidays or days where we're not operating. So we have a couple different ways to correct that. All right, so if we go in here and we find, okay, we're not operating on the 25th or the 24th of December, I could in here kind of patch this in 2 different ways. If I know we're not operating and I just want to remove this, I can delete a time slot. But if I'm not confident, maybe there's a chance that we'll be bringing this back, or there's a chance that we will be conducting this shift, I could also enter 0 as the number of volunteers needed. Let me show you both of these scenarios. So I'm going to kind of make those changes. I'm deleting the 24th and I'm marking the 25th as needing 0 volunteers. In order to actually publish these changes, I need to, at the top or bottom of the page, click on Update Time Slot Information. When I do that, it'll make those changes. So if we go back into December here, we can see the 24th is gone, but the 25th is still here. It's marked in red. It says Disabled Time Slot. If you input 0 as the number of volunteers needed for a time slot event, the system will disable that time slot. So that particular shift is only visible on this page. Your volunteers do not see it. It's not published. It's not something people are being asked to sign up for. but it's something that you can still see. So if you needed to come back in here and say, well, actually, we did have something come up. I need 5 people. I don't have to make a new shift. I can just essentially re-enable this by changing the number of volunteers needed. And then again, saving my change by updating my time slot info. And now if we look back at that shift, I know there's a lot of dates whirring by here, but the 25th, we can see has 5 people. Now this would be a shift that would be displayed again and recruiting for volunteers. So those are kind of 2 different ways to handle holidays or days you need to skip. Obviously, all of these are their own entities as well. So if perhaps some of these days are shorter or longer, there's a special event, you can always come in here and adjust each of these independently. You could add more notes in here if I wanted to say like, hey, this is a cold pack day, and I want people to be aware of that. Generally speaking, I don't use these notes if the shifts are the same, because that's just kind of redundant. But if there's something you need to call out and point people toward, like giving it a title, that's essentially what these notes function as for the different time slots. These are visible to volunteers, and functionally they look like a title from the volunteer's perspective. Okay, so again, we repeated out our morning shift here. In our example, maybe we also need to repeat out this afternoon shift, but perhaps this one is only Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So what we can do is click on repeat time slot next to the afternoon shift. And then from there, we select what days of the week to repeat this on, how frequently to repeat. We give it a start time or start date. We give it an end date, and then we just let the system build out that calendar. So it's going to take, in this case, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday between August 4th and May 31st of next year, and create that shift. And then again, it's essentially just going to build out all of those different afternoon positions now. So that repeat function is a pretty simple way to create a large-scale recurring event. In case you missed how we got to this particular screen, let me show that one more time. From the main dashboard, if we go into Search and Manage Existing Opportunities under Opportunity Management, so this is assuming that you have created the baseline event already with those template time slots. But if we go into Search and Manage Existing Opportunities, we find that time slot event that we want to work on, and then we click on this Manage Time Slots option on the left-hand side. You can also get here, if you click on the name of the event, there's an option in here to manage time slots. All right, there are a couple more things that I want to point out in particular that relate to time slot events, just kind of in this discussion. So one thing is reserving shifts for volunteers. So if you have a group who's working with you and they're going to be taking a couple time slots or a couple positions from your different events, then a reservation code is how you should accomplish that. We're not going to dig through all of the instructions on reservations. We have different webinars on this subject. But just generally speaking, let's say you have a corporate partner or a group who's coming in to work with you and they want to take some of those spots, but you would still like to know who those individuals are. That's what reservations are typically used for. So if we click into Reservation Management under Opportunity Management, we can make a code or we can reuse an existing code, and I can go into manage this reservation code, and then I can input how many spots I want to save. So if we wanted to reserve spots in that event that I just created, I would need to make sure there's enough space available, but then I can go and select that particular event, click Assign Opportunity to Reservation, and then I can pick which shifts I want to reserve for that partner. So again, the case of like corporate partners or like church or school groups that are working with you, where you do want to identify the names of the individuals who will be attending, these reservations are a great way to do that because you can essentially, cap or select a certain set of shifts. Now, again, there have to be enough spots available. So I only have some shifts where there's 15 spots available. So those are the only things that I could select here. If I wanted to have this group go beyond what's normally available, I would need to adjust the time slot to match that need. But these reservations essentially carve out those positions so only the group has access to sign up for those shifts. So actually I want to change one quick thing about this event just so we can see those shifts I just reserved. But if we go into kind of sharing this code, so how would I have people utilize this reservation? Generally, I would just copy this link next to the reservation code itself. There's also an email, but essentially you can send people to a landing page that would be designed for that corporate partner. You can attach their logo to the reservation code, and then they only see the spots that were saved for them. So if we click into this, they can see, all of those different positions that I selected. They're only seeing those spots, and then they just sign up like normal. They don't need to know anything special about the event itself. Okay, so again, this is just something that's commonly used in tandem with time slot events. One last thing to point out about these reservations: when you are looking at an event that has reservations, so if we go to view the registered volunteers for this event, you will see those reservations appear under each time slot. So if you want to check like which group is coming in this day, this reservation is directly here. Speaking of this particular page, when you're looking at the list of registered volunteers, I want to point out something else that's very useful. If we go to a different example in my system where I actually have some registrations, perhaps I allow volunteers for this event who are, under 18, but I need to make sure they're attending with an adult or with a parent. It would be useful on this page to be able to quickly see the age of these volunteers. So something that you can add on any event, not just time slot events, is an extra column to this page. So if we back up and go into editing this opportunity, so I go to update or edit opportunity, under the additional organizer options is a setting called include the following information in the registration listing for this opportunity. And this is a drop-down. You can go and pick a particular piece of information to include. So I can select here age, and then if we update this event, that will essentially just add an extra column when I'm looking at the list of attendees for my event. So if I notice someone who's under 18, I can kind of quickly identify that and then look around to see like if their parent is also attending at the same time. But it basically just adds that data as an extra column on this page, which can be very useful when you're trying to engage with your attendees and you need to call out that information kind of directly. All right, and then the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about today in regards to time slot events is sending notifications or engaging with registrants. This can be done in a couple different places. So right now we're looking at the list of attendees for this event. I can select all of these attendees up at the top of the page, or I could just select a particular time slot, or I could actually set a date range. Maybe I want to email all of the people who are attending in May because there's just some special news, like maybe we have some construction happening and I just want people to be aware, like, hey, this is going on. I could select everyone who's registered in the month of May, and then down at the bottom, I can say, let's send an email. All right, so I could email from this page all of those volunteers, again, in this case, within that time frame. So you can do that on a per event basis or a per shift basis or for your entire event. You can also do this for multiple events at once. Time slot events have a pretty helpful feature that if you have them selected on kind of this main opportunity dashboard, if you go to in the drop down here for bulk actions, send an email, you can select a date. So again, this applies primarily to time slot events. If you have a normal event selected, those registrants will be included because presumably you wanted to email them regardless of the date. So if you're just trying to email people who are registered on a particular date, let's use the example of inclement weather. Perhaps there's something happening tomorrow and you just want people to be aware you're starting late. What you can do if you want to email everyone in your database, whether it's just time slots and normal events and service projects, what you can do is an advanced search based on a particular date. So say find all of the events that are happening tomorrow, right? This will exclude normal events that aren't happening tomorrow, but then time slot events that are happening tomorrow, by default, if I just say register or send email to registered volunteers, it would email everyone who's signed up for any of these shifts, but we can apply a date filter to that. So only people signed up on this particular date. And then you can do that across multiple events at one time. So again, the idea of like inclement weather, this is just a nice way to kind of quickly narrow that down, send one mass email to all those volunteers. Okay. Now, again, there's a lot of different ways to send emails through Service. That's also a subject that we have a separate webinar on. So if you have any questions about that, I would encourage you to review that information. And of course, let us know if there's anything that we can help you with in that regard. But today, we overviewed kind of start to finish, what is a time slot event? How do we set those up? What are the different options that relate to creating time slot events specifically, and then as you're engaging them or as you are working within the time slot itself, how do we repeat those shifts? And then how do we manage kind of the registrations and engage with that side of the system as well? So a lot of data that we went through today. If you do have further questions, of course, please feel free to reach out to our customer support tool. I wanted to mention that at the bottom of the page, whenever you are logged into the system, you will always see this Need Help button. This is how you submit a ticket to our customer support team. It's also where our knowledge base articles are housed, which have a lot of good information. If we click Need Help here, you can type in a topic. So let's say we want to learn more about time slots. We could search for that term. You'll see articles that have to do with that. So that repeat function that we went through today, if you want step-by-step instructions, there's a great article here that has just step-by-step instructions of how to do that particular process. So there's a lot of good information in here. Personally, I prefer to pop these articles out into a separate tab. I just think they're kind of easier to consume that way, but that is of course up to you. Regardless what you search by, you can always click on Contact Us and then submit a ticket to our customer support team. They are excellent. If you haven't already engaged with them, please feel free to use this. They'll get back to you very quickly, and they are very knowledgeable about the system. Apart from that, I did want to call attention again to our YouTube channel. If you go to video.servicetech.com, that'll take you here. You could also just go to YouTube and search for Service Technologies. There's a lot of good information posted here. We have playlists on different topics. We introduced a number of topics today that we didn't really flesh out, like groups and reservations and sending emails and service projects. We have videos on basically all of that content. So feel free to kind of search around in here. There's a lot of good information in there. With that said, thank you so much for joining today. We'll leave the call open in case you do have a couple more questions here. But I just wanted to point out that, of course, you can always contact our customer support team as well.